My name is Owen, and today's reading is from Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they know God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds, for animals and creeping things. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks so much, Owen. You did a great job. Very good morning to you all. It's nice to see you. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Cian Carroll. I'm one of the elders here at Calvary Cork. I've been an elder for about 5 years. So I don't come up here too often, so I understand if you might not recognise me. I do worship sometimes, so some of you will know me, but nice to meet you, those who are new and those who I haven't met before. So today we're continuing our series called What's the Story? It's a national campaign that's been rolled out there by, I think it's the Evangelical Alliance Ireland. But essentially we've been looking at the 6 most common questions people have in Ireland regarding faith, life and religion. So it's a little bit different to what we normally do, but I think it's very worthwhile. And today is week 2. So Mike did talk on suffering last week, which is very good. If you missed it, you should tune in on YouTube to see that. But today is on atheism. So, and the question posed by the series is there anybody out there? So this is obviously a very common question that people have. People wonder about science and religion and faith, life all the time in that context. Before we start, I'm just going to pray for a sec. So, Father God, we come before you humbly, Lord, knowing that you're God and we're just mortal humans, Lord. To think that we could truly grasp you and know you fully is impossible, Lord. We know that you're much higher than our ways. But thank you, Lord, that you've chosen to reveal yourself in certain ways to us, Lord, through your creation, that we can actually know you and we can know that you exist, Lord. And so I pray that you would just guide us in all knowledge and wisdom this morning. Help us to come into an even deeper realization of your realness, Lord, of your existence, a deeper appreciation for your power in the universe displayed, Lord, and a deeper appreciation for your Son, Jesus Christ, Lord, who made it possible to have a relationship with you at all, Lord, even though we were sinful and broken people, Lord. Guide us this morning, Lord, and give us ears to hear what you have to say. In Jesus' name. So I'm going to start with a quiz. Anyone who knows me well enough knows that I'm a sucker for quizzes. I like trivia and stuff. But this quiz is going to be a bit strange, so bear with me. It's not going to be a very good quiz. It's going to be a bit weird. But you can have a bit of an input anyway and play along if you don't mind. So round 1 of the quiz, first question, it should be up on the thing there. It's going to be really random. Yeah. Guess the 2 words that are on the next slide. And there's no clues. All right. Just guess the 2 words that are on the next slide. Any takers? No, actually, no. Good guess, though. No, you're not going to get it. Anyway, you can move on to the answer there, Ricky. So, 50-50. So the answer is blind faith. And so, obviously, there's no possible way you could have known that, really, unless you took a guess in blind faith. And so when we're talking about atheism today, and is God real, is he not real, a lot of atheistic philosophers and people who are common atheistic writers like Richard Dawkins and stuff would very often say that this is the only faith that a religious believer can have, that there's absolutely no evidence for God in the universe, and that to believe in God, you have to just close your eyes and say, yeah, I believe in God, and ignore all evidential facts or clues in the universe. I obviously don't believe that. I don't believe that's true at all. And so that brings us to our second question, which is round 2. So you can move on to round 2. So guess the one word on the next slide. So I'm going to give you clues this time, right? So the next word, it has 8 letters. It starts with E and it ends with E. So it starts in oh, and I was going to give one last clue. It's defined as the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. So I think Miles got it there. So the answer is evidence. So you see the difference in this question and the first question, where the first question I gave you no clues and you had to make a guess. But in this question, Miles was able to get it because he got after 2 clues, but I gave you 3 clues. And this is the sort of faith that Christians have, and I believe this is the sort of faith that every single person in the universe has, whether you believe there's a God or not. Everyone looks at evidence and clues and their beliefs, and they make a judgment call and they make a step of faith based on what they think is the evidence and facts. And so that's the difference between blind faith and what true religious faith is. And even to say, yeah, like a lot of atheistic believers and stuff would say that there's no element of faith to atheism and science. But I have a quote here from theologian John Hott. It should be a slide there as well, the next slide. It puts it like this, and it's basically saying that everyone has faith and everyone puts their faith in something. And I'll read the quote there. At some point in the validation of every truth claim or hypothesis, a leap of faith is an inescapable ingredient. At the foundation of every human search for understanding and truth, including the scientific search, an ineradicable element of trust is present. He goes on to say that faith in this sense, and not in the sense of wild imaginings and wishful thinking, lies at the root of all authentic religion and science. So essentially that's the kind of journey we're on. That's the basis of how we're going to look at this now, is that every single person in this world has to make a faith-based call on anything, even something simple as, is the sun going to rise tomorrow? I mean, all evidence points to yes, it has done for all our lives and before that, but who's to say that it's not going to stop tomorrow? We can't know with 100% certainty, but we can say with a very strong degree of certainty, but not absolute certainty, that it will, because of evidence. So that's the sort of conclusions we're going to draw from the discussions we have today. We're going to operate in that sense. One last round, and this round's going to be really weird, so bear with me, I'm sorry. So this is round 3. I have something in my back pocket, right? I'll give you a choice of 2 answers. It's either my keys, my set of keys for my car and my house and all that, or it's the front door to my house, right? So it's either my keys in my back pocket or the front door to my house. So think about it now. You can't say with 100% certainty that it's not my front door. Maybe my house is really tiny and the door fits in my pocket. Maybe I burned the door to ash and I put that in my pocket. Maybe there's a black hole or something in my pocket and that fits the door, even though all of us would get sucked in this very instant. Maybe your brain is playing tricks on you and you can't see the big wooden door sticking out behind me, out of my pocket. So you see, these are obviously very silly, and this is a silly analogy in a way, but essentially you're going to have to make a faith-based choice even on this. But one choice requires much less faith than the other. One requires a lot of faith, one requires a little faith. And obviously the answer is it's my keys. And that doesn't take a lot of faith to believe because it's logical and it's evidence-based. So this is a very silly example, but I believe that in order to hold an atheistic worldview, this is the kind of mental and logistical gymnastics you have to do in your brain to try to come up with explanations for certain things just to avoid believing in God, in my opinion. They place their faith in illogical conclusions, just like the front door option, when there's a much more reasonable option to go with, just because they don't want to believe in God, or there's other reasons why, who knows. But I'm going to hopefully show this with a couple of just discussion points and a bit of evidence. And so the big idea and the whole central point to the talk is this. It takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe that there is a God. So it takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe that there is a God. And I'm going to support this by showing evidence, only just using 2 questions based on logical and scientific understanding. There's way more arguments than this, but I'm just going to pick these 2 because personally these are the most impactful for me and the ones that make the most sense to me. So the two questions are that we're going to look at: how did anything come about? How did anything come about? And it'll make more sense when we talk later about it. Second one is, how did our universe come about? So how did the universe that we exist in come about in the way it behaves and the way it is right now? So they're the 2 questions. So a small caveat: this is going to be very different to the usual sermons that we're used to. Like I kind of got to earlier, we're not going to really spend a whole lot of time in the Bible and discovering biblical truths and stuff from a biblical and religious perspective, which is one of our core values, and we do all the time. But I think to actually best approach this topic, which is not necessarily a religious one, it's better to look at it from a logical standpoint. So we're going to just look at kind of logical arguments and scientific arguments rather than ones that are specifically Christian. So they might be just general theistic arguments, say that theistic is just the opposite of atheistic. So there is a God or there isn't a God, and we're not going to really get into the details of who that God is the Christian God, and so on and so forth. But there will be other parts to the series that go to that detail and stuff, so don't worry. But so that's going to be quite a unique kind of sermon that we're not used to here. And we don't really have time to go into the very in-depth science of all these arguments and stuff I'm going to bring up, unfortunately. So I'm going to just keep a very high-level general overview. But I'd recommend, if you're curious and want to know more, there's loads of stuff online, loads of good resources, loads of good speakers on the topic, like Dr. Jen Lennox, Poking Horn, William Lane Craig. There's tons of research out there, tons of good arguments. Tim Keller has a great book, Reason for God. So there's more you can get to if you want to, but I'm just going to have a general high-level overview. So before we get to the questions, I'm just going to briefly introduce a bit about my own background. So I graduated from UCC in 2017 with a degree in chemistry. And I've worked in science ever since then, in pharmaceuticals. So I've been lucky to have a decent job since I've left college, which is good. And I've done some small postgraduate studies as well along the way there since I've graduated. But I'm really not that smart at all, right? I'm not even a real scientist, to be fair. I did a degree, yeah, but I don't have a PhD. I don't have any published works or anything like that. I wasn't the smartest in my class by a long shot. I was probably somewhere towards the middle or towards the end. So there are people who are way smarter than me who believe there's no God, and there's people who are way smarter than me who believe there is a God. And why am I saying all this? I know it's a bit of a ramble, but the only reason I'm saying this is essentially that my background doesn't add any authority to what I'm saying. It helps me a bit in understanding scientific concepts and language, it helps me communicate it or whatever, but that's about it. Just because of my background or whatever, that doesn't matter to the argument I'm about to make. So, and the main point I'm making here is that the truth or validity of an argument isn't determined by judging the person who says it, or even by how many people say it. It's determined by judging the merit of the argument itself. And that's the key aspect of searching for truth. You don't look to who's saying it, how many people are saying it. Truth is not a democratic process. You have to judge it on the merits of the argument itself. So we'll come to a point in the world where sometimes there can be a general narrative or general consensus that the world of science is atheistic. So we could say that's a presupposition or something that people suppose. A lot of people in general suppose that. So the point I just made about the argument being based on merits and not on who says it essentially makes that point about science being atheistic irrelevant, or scientists in general being atheistic. It makes it somewhat irrelevant, because even if 99% of scientists in the world were atheistic, which they're not, even if there was only 1% of scientists that believed there was a God and had arguments for it, you still have to judge the arguments based on what they say and on the logical truth behind them, not on how many people are saying it. So that's one point why let's ignore and cast out the idea that, it's either science or religion. That's not true at all. Science and religion are not against each other, and we can have both and we can understand both in an accurate way. So even more than the aspect of relevance, that it's not relevant to say that, it's just not true. Like I said, there is a lot of very, very smart, very good scientists who are Christian, theistic, who believe in God, who are at the forefront of their technologies across the whole fields of science. Like, it's not just a one-way street at all when it comes to science and religion. Like, there are loads of good scientists, even in Cork and UCC, say, who have very strong faith in God, and even Christian faith, who are very, very smart science people. And even, like, if you look back through history, the narrative is shifted even further in the favour of theistic scientists who believe in God. When you look back through history, you see famous scientists like Galileo, Robert Boyle, who was probably the most famous Irish scientist of all time. You would have learned about him in secondary school, Boyle's law and all that. Got Isaac Newton, who came up with the theory of gravity and defined all that. Max Planck, an amazing mathematician and scientist. Louis Pasteur, who you might recognize his name from pasteurization. It's how you treat milk to kill bacteria and stuff. That comes from his name. He was a very important microbiologist and scientist who was a Christian. Even Albert Einstein, no, he wasn't a Christian by any means, but he believed in a world that God had to exist because of what he observed in the nature and evidence of nature in a very logical and reasonable sense. So I have two quotes. One is from Louis Pasteur, the guy who I just mentioned a minute ago. He was a devout Christian and very, very important scientist. It says, "The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the works of the Creator." So I think that's also how I feel. I fully agree with him there. The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the works of the Creator. Einstein, again, like I said, not a Christian, but I have a quote from him as well. It's a very interesting quote. It says, "My religion consists of a humble admiration of the illimitable superior spirit who reveals himself in the slight details that we are able to perceive with our frail and feeble mind." And to be honest, these two guys, scientists, super smart, they're only agreeing with the Bible, as Owen read earlier, Romans 1, I'm going to read from 18 to 20 again, or verse 18 to 20. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their righteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to him. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." So our basis for trying to find the answer to the question of, is there anybody out there, is found in the study of the universe, in science, and we need to look to the things that have been created, as it says in Romans 1. So that brings me to my first question. I'll set it up. How did anything come about? How did anything come about? We're going to have to do a bit of mental gymnastics here again, a small bit. It's going to be hard to imagine this, right? But for this question, we're going to have to go way back, before everything and anything at all existed. I want you to maybe close your eyes for a second and try to imagine nothing. Nothing. Some of you might imagine a black screen, but in that, it's not nothing, or black empty space, because there's space there, there's time there. So even when there's no matter, there's still space and time in your head. It's very hard to imagine nothing. You might say, what would you rate Keane's quiz out of 10? Nothing. Nothing is a very hard thing to grasp. There's no time, no space, no matter, no laws of nature, nothing. So how do we get from there, a point of nothing, to where we are now, with the universe all around us, very complex, human life, all that sort of stuff? So how did anything come about from that? A lot of people answer this question by just saying, oh, the Big Bang. A lot of people say, shrugging, the Big Bang. But yes, I do believe in a Big Bang model too, but I'm talking about before that. What or who caused the Big Bang? Where did the necessary components and physical laws come from to allow the Big Bang to happen? If there was no space for it to happen in yet, or time, or any matter at all at this point, how did the universe come about? The universe did not exist, so the Big Bang could not happen out of nothing. There was nothing there. So the main argument I'm going to make here is one that Thomas Aquinas made back in the 13th century. He was a friar. He made 5 arguments to prove the existence of God, called the 5 ways. And I'm only just going to mention one of them. And this one is very impactful to me. It's the argument is this. It's the argument of efficient cause, or the argument of first cause. So I'm just saying that there. So it's the argument of efficient cause or first cause. This argument is based on the very simple logical truth that every effect must have a cause. Nothing happens without something causing it to happen. Or to put it another way, nothing begins to exist without something that caused it to exist. And this is pretty much a very universally accepted truth, a very simple, logical truth that almost pretty much everyone accepts. Just to put it in a little analogy, like we all know for a fact that a tractor just can't spontaneously appear in front of us right here in the room like that. Like, obviously we believe that someone would have to design it and get the parts, put it together and drive it in here. Like, it comes down to very simple truth like that. For something to come into existence, something has to cause it to exist. We can prove it by saying stuff just doesn't come out of nowhere like that for no reason whatsoever. So logic follows like this. If there was nothing and then the universe came into existence, then something or someone had to cause the universe to come into existence. Anything that could have caused the universe to come into existence has to, by default, be outside the laws of nature and physics and logic. It did not need a cause itself to exist. If it did have a cause, then there was something before that didn't have a cause. It has to be outside of time and space. It has to be eternal because there was no time or space, so it has to exist outside of that. And in my opinion, this perfectly describes a supernatural being or the God of the universe that we believe in. So if you imagine there can't be a complete infinite cycle of things that caused something else. If you go back to the Big Bang, say, the beginning of the universe, what caused that? You might say God, and say, oh, what caused God? Something else. And you go back and back and back. And even if you admit that our God isn't the one that didn't have a beginning, you're going to end up with another God that didn't have a beginning because logical facts say that everything that came to existence have to have an existence. And so to say anything else is going against the laws of nature, and what to be called something that's against the laws of nature, that's supernatural, it's above the laws of nature, and it's metaphysical, it's outside the laws of physics. And so that's a very common view down through the ages. It makes a lot of sense to me. To be honest, a lot of times when I'm doubting God, which we all go through times in our life like that, this is often what I come back to be like, maybe I'm questioning my emotions, say, oh, did I just make up how I felt about God that time or whatever? And I think, no, God's real because there has to be something that started it all. So it's a very common argument, and loads of arguments related to that as well. So how do atheists juggle this assertion, this very logical fact that something can come from nothing? I'm going to mention a couple of their arguments briefly, and we won't go into very big detail, but one of the arguments is that the universe created itself from nothing. This is called the cosmic bootstrap theory or proposal. So like it comes from the term like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, to think that I could grab my laces now and lift myself up from my bootstraps. It's based on that principle. And so to say that the universe can create itself from nothing is completely logical, obviously. Nothing can create itself since it doesn't exist yet to create something. So X creates Y. Y can't be created without X. Y can't create Y because it doesn't exist yet to create itself. So obviously it doesn't make sense. If you are certain that saying that is true, then that's a supernatural faith-based claim that takes a lot of faith to believe because it doesn't exist in the laws of nature. So you're saying it's supernatural and you're making a faith-based claim. Some people say, and this is kind of a common one, and Stephen Hawking is a guy who would kind of adhere to this, who's a very famous atheist, says the universe was created by mathematical theories or laws of nature, such as gravitation. So the first question I pose is then, what or who created the mathematical theories, or what or who created the laws of nature, like gravitation? Where did they come from? Who set the parameters? Who decided what they were going to be determined as? And even more so than that, a law or theory doesn't have any creative power. It's just descriptive and predictive, like it's helpful, but it doesn't actually do anything. So the example that John Lennox gives, who was a very famous Christian apologist and professor of maths in Oxford University, he gives an analogy of money and maths. So if I've got €2 in my pocket, maths will tell me that 1 + 1 = 2, so I've got €2. But no matter how long I leave the €2 in my pocket, it's not going to give me €4. It's not going to create more euros because maths, laws, gravity, nature, in a law sense, doesn't create anything, doesn't have creative power. The third one people say is that the universe always existed. So firstly, to say this, another, again, is claiming that the universe itself is outside the laws of nature, which is, again, a supernatural faith-based claim. But even beyond that, science and scientific evidence points very, very strongly to a universe that did begin. And this is a very commonly held theory that the universe began at a certain time and point for two reasons. One is that we can observe that the universe is still expanding. And so if you imagine the guy who discovered that was Edwin Hubble in 1929. He noticed that all the galaxies in the sky were expanding away from each other over time. And so if you imagine a balloon that I'm blowing up, there's 2 points on it, or several points on it, and as I blow up the balloon, the points are getting further and further away. So we know that the universe is expanding for many reasons. And so if you imagine the universe has been expanding for a long period of time, if you rewind it backwards and think about it in a backward sense, the universe was getting smaller and smaller as we go back in time. And you get to a point eventually back in time where the universe had no space. It was so small, and it began somewhere, and so that's like point zero, people call it. The second reason why people believe that there was a beginning to the universe is the Big Bang model, which is very commonly accepted by science. So Penzias and Wilson, two scientists, discovered the cosmic microwave background and won the Nobel Prize in 1964. So they discovered leftover radiation across the universe. So this gave evidence for a high-temperature Big Bang at a certain point in time that occurred at the creation of the universe at a point in time, and this model is widely accepted by most rational scientists. I have a quote from Arno Penzias, the guy who actually discovered this with another guy. He was actually a Christian himself. He says, "The best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole." So we see how science points to a beginning. It's not logical to say there was no beginning. So then the last one people bring up is that we don't know yet, but it's not God. And so again, this is clearly not a scientific claim. It's a very faith-based claim. They have faith that science will eventually disprove God, and they're making a huge guess, and they're betting their whole life essentially on a guess that there is no God, because we don't know yet how the universe came to be. So, sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful there for a while, but we note that all those claims that they make are all faith-based claims, and they're not scientifically supported. It comes to a point where science and nature stops working, and so they try to twist science and nature to fit their narrative. So, like I said earlier, something that's outside the laws of logic and science and nature is supernatural. So they're essentially describing a supernatural thing without admitting that it's supernatural. Whereas the Christian worldview is saying, yeah, we get to a point in the history of the universe where something supernatural had to have happened, and so we believe that to be God. We believe it to be a supernatural being, and we admit it. So round 4 of the quiz, you're going to enjoy this. The next slide has one word for you to guess. Here are the clues. So it starts with a H. It's a word used as a basic, simple, and common way of greeting someone, but it doesn't end in O, I, or Y. So that cancels out hello, hi, hey. What else is there? Starts with a H. Maybe if I took an atheistic approach to logic and reason, I might say the next answer, which is hello, spelled with a W. I might say, oh, we can twist how English works, and we can add a W to the end, and that actually fits the criteria, but that's not a word, and that doesn't fit logic or reason. Or we could do another way. Actually, the next slide is how are you getting on? One word. And again, you're twisting the laws of English, and you're twisting logic to fit a narrative that doesn't really make sense. But I have an answer. The true answer is it, do anyone want to guess it? What's that? Nah. Sorry. No. I'll go to the next slide. It's Ola. It's Ola, right? And so we see in this that it fits all the criteria. It's a common word. People used to greet each other. It's spelled the way I gave the clues on. But this word transcends the English language. The rules of English don't apply to this word. And so to understand God, or to understand the creation of the universe, we have to transcend the laws of nature, the laws of physics, the laws of logic, and anything that transcends those laws is a supernatural being, and that's a God of some shape or form. I believe it's the Christian God, obviously. So that's the kind of logical jump we make, which I think is a logical one. It fits the criteria. You're just going above the laws of nature rather than trying to twist the laws of nature. And so, back to my main point that I made at the start, we see that in the context of the earliest origin of the universe, it takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe that there is a God. It takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe that there is a God. You're going to have to twist all that logic to fit your narrative, which takes a lot of faith, in my opinion. This brings me to my second question. How did our universe come about? Or, to put it in more specific terms, how did we end up with a functional, life-supporting universe like ours? How did it end up like that? So to move on to this question, we just have to move a tiny bit along on the timescale that we were on a while ago, where there was nothing, and then something kicked it off. So we can just say maybe it just happened by accident. Bang, it kicked something off. So now the universe has somehow been kickstarted into existence, and in the tiny fractions of a second after the universe begins, so much is already happening. Conditions are off the scale hot and energy dense. Space is expanding extremely rapidly after starting so small. So what stopped this totally random and uncontrolled event from bringing forth only chaos and disorder? What are the odds that by pure random chance, the absolute ideal physical conditions and natural laws existed in perfect harmony in the midst of this uncontrolled event to give us the awe-inspiring universe that we have today, where there's stars and planets that formed and didn't immediately get destroyed, or even where life of any kind can be supported? This is a very big question, and very smart cosmologists and theoretical physicists, much smarter than me, have been able to do some very difficult maths and actually numerically quantify a lot of the chances of different conditions and parameters working out so perfectly by chance. And the numbers are absolutely eye-watering, and to be honest, they're almost impossible to comprehend or grasp. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to understand this, but this concept, though, is known as fine-tuning of the universe. So fine-tuning. It's a very common argument and a very good one, I think. And so from this study, there's clearly developed what's called the fine-tuning problem that atheists have to solve. But I'm only going to give two examples, and there's been defined a good 20 or so, a bit more, of kind of cosmological constants and things like that, like constant laws of nature that had to exist in perfect harmony to happen, or the perfect initial conditions of the universe that just had to exist for it to end up like this. So there's a few different ones that have been discussed in research, but I'm only just going to mention two. So the first one is the gravitational constant. So there's a slide for that. Yeah, this one is actually the most likely to have occurred that I could find on the internet anyway. There might be other ones, I'm not sure, but this one is the most likely to have occurred that I found, right? So gravitational constant, like gravitational force, is like the large-scale attractive force, obviously, that holds people on planets and holds planets, stars, and galaxies together. If it was too weak, planets and stars wouldn't form. If it was too strong, stars burn up too quickly. So, like, it has to be exactly this number that we have, this constant that we have to have supported a life where there's like stars, planets, life, such and such. So the odds are up there. Yeah, so the odds are 1 in 10 to the power of 34. So that's a 1 in 1 with 34 zeros after a chance. Right, and that number is very hard to comprehend. It's a huge, huge number. I don't even know what it's called, to be honest. But it's a huge number, right? And to get there, I'm going to try to give some context. So the odds of winning the Euromillions, which is 5 numbers plus 2 stars, you can deduce it by maths, is in 1 in 139,838,160. Sorry, 160. So as you can see, that's a much, much smaller number than the one on top, where there's 34 zeros after it. That's a tiny, tiny number. And to be honest, even the number of stars, or that's the stars, that's the typo, the number of stars in the universe is roughly 200 billion trillion. So that's 2 by 10 to the power of 23. And even that number is very, very much smaller than the odds of having the gravitational constant happen by chance. And so, to put it slightly in perspective, it would be like blindfolding me and placing all the 200 billion trillion stars of the universe in front of me, and you picking one of those stars, and I say I have to pick the star, and then with a blindfold on and no clues, I say it's that one over there, and it's right. So out of 200 billion trillion, if I pick the right star, that's impossible. That's essentially impossible, and that's not even really coming close to the odds of the gravitational constant being what it is by chance. And that's the most likely one. That's literally the one with the best odds of happening. And so the next one I'm going to look at is initial entropy, and this is a scientific term. I'm going to try to explain it in very basic terms. So entropy is essentially, if you're anyone who studied thermodynamics in college or whatever, to put it very, very roughly and briefly, the entropy is a measure of randomness or disorder. It's like a scientific way of measuring randomness or disorder in a system or in the universe, say. So Dr. Peter Taylor, actually, of Dublin City University, he's the assistant professor in the Centre for Astrophysics and Relativity. He's a Christian man. He's brother of Katie Taylor, the Irish boxer. I've been in the room with him a couple of times, hearing him talk. Very smart guy and a Christian man. Very, very, very good stuff. His arguments actually for this are on the What's the Story 22.ie website, if you want to read a little bit more. So I've borrowed some of these arguments from him here on this point. But essentially, like, entropy existed or exists now, disorder exists now, and scientists have been able to understand and calculate and deduce that in the initial conditions of the universe, just when the universe kicked off, the state and condition that entropy had to be in, this order of disorder and randomness, the state that was in had to be like so smooth and so perfect for the universe to exist as it is now. Like, the entropy had to be in a very rare, like almost like immaculately smooth way, whereas now there's loads of disorder, but for the universe to expand and create as it did, it had to be immensely smooth and perfect. And so the odds of this condition existing without intervention from a supernatural being by chance, this number is absolutely ridiculous. It's 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123, so that's double exponential. It's actually almost impossible to comprehend that number, right? So, like, it's ridiculous. It's hard to even try to explain. So I can't even write down, I couldn't fit on this slide or a million slides, or I couldn't even write down any amount of zeros that could actually represent that number in full decimal form. You couldn't write the amount of zeros. It's physically impossible. There's that many zeros. There's 10 to the power of 82 atoms in the whole observable universe. And that number is way, way smaller than the number of zeros at the end of that number for the initial state of entropy to have existed. So basically you're saying that if I was to write out all the zeros, there'd be more zeros on that than there would be atoms in the universe, the observable universe. And so that number is ridiculous. It's so hard to comprehend. And that's just 2 ones we've looked at, and there's loads more. And so the chances of that happening, it's virtually impossible by chance. It's virtually impossible. It's so hard to comprehend. And Dr. Peter Taylor puts like this, taking a quote from him from that article on What's the Story. He says, "Winning the Euromillions every week for the rest of my life is still many, many times more likely than the initial entropy having its absurdly low value by chance. When we combine the values of all the constants of nature being what they are by chance, then the probability is vanishingly small." So the odds of winning the Euromillions, 1 in 189 million, or whatever it was. Imagine winning the Euromillions every week for the rest of your life. And that doesn't even come close to being the chances of having this initial state of entropy, and never mind the combined state of all the rest of them. So all this to say, that makes a lot more sense to me to believe that there was an intelligent creator, designer, supernatural being behind it all to govern it and to make sure it happened exactly as that, because it's so impossible and so unlikely to have happened. I'm going to give 2 very quick atheistic explanations that they try to give to explain the phenomenon or solve the fine-tuning problem. So one is that we just got really lucky. So it just happened this way. That's one of the best arguments, to be honest. That's probably their best argument. So then you're essentially saying you're betting against these mind-numbing odds to say it all happened by chance, rather than admit there was an intelligent designer behind it all, and that takes a lot of faith. The other theory or argument they make is the multiverse theory. So this states that, or postulates that, there are countless other universes that exist as well as our universe out there, and we just happen to exist in the universe that got lucky, essentially. But it's only a matter of chance or a matter of time before one of the universes gets it right. So there's absolutely not a shred of scientific evidence that supports this whatsoever. It's total fiction. It's totally made up. It's a completely faith-based claim, and and they admit there's absolutely no scientific evidence to support this claim whatsoever. So it's just blind faith. You're saying, oh, there's loads of other universes and we just got lucky. That's blind faith, and that's not faith based on evidence. So I've one quote here from Fred Hoyle, who was a very famous scientist and atheist, very strong atheist. He sums this argument up as an atheist. He says, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there is no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. I think that perfectly sums it up. Coming from an atheist, you can't argue with this. It's a common sense approach. The smallest step of faith you have to take is just to say that there was an intelligent creator behind it all. And so again, we see in the context of the fine-tuning of the universe, it takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe that there is a God. And so that brings me to my conclusion, really. That's only two arguments of many, many arguments that show sufficient evidence, in my opinion, for God's existence. We haven't even mentioned other strong arguments like the origin of first life. How did complex life form from random, non-living substances and chemicals on Earth that was created by chance? How does that work? The origin of morals. Why is there such a thing as right and wrong, good or bad, if there is no given moral law and everything is driven by survival of the fittest? Why is it wrong to do what you want and just survive? Why do we have a sense of right and wrong? And I'm not even going to go into them, but there's more to research on all of them and many more arguments if you want to get into it, so look into it yourselves. And so again, it takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe there is a God. Round 5 of the quiz, last round. This one, actually there's no slide for this one, I'm just going to say it. Round 5 is this. The question is there anybody out there? I'm going to give you some clues. The answer is a 3-letter word that begins with Y. It's not YNO with a silent Y. It's yes. It's yes. The answer to the question, is there anybody out there? The answer is yes. And I think we have all the evidence to believe that. And I don't believe in God because I think it's a nice idea or because it's convenient for me. I believe in God because I'm totally and genuinely convinced by the objective evidence that He's real, as well as some subjective experiential evidence that I've experienced myself. But essentially, without any of that, like I said earlier, when I'm doubting, I come back to these logical arguments. God has to be real because of these arguments and many others. So I don't believe in it because it's convenient. I believe it's true. And I think I've showed why I believe that. And that's not even an exhaustive list. So then, my very, very last point. If God is real, then what are you going to do about it? If God is real, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with that knowledge? Is there anything more important than God, creator than the whole universe, if He is real? Is there? There's not. It answers all the essential questions of life, which we'll look at for the rest of the series. It's so important, you can't ignore it. You can't just bury your head in the sand. If He is real, you have to do something about it. And this is the beautiful thing. This is the good news. God of the universe, who exists and made everything, He knows us. He knows everything about us. And even more than that, He loves us. We're fully known and we're fully loved. He's made a way for us to actually know Him through His Son, Jesus Christ. And even though we're broken and sinful people, we can have a relationship with the perfect and all-powerful God of the universe, because His perfect Son, Jesus, paid the price for our sins on the cross and took away the punishment that we deserved, and healed the brokenness that we had. And so now, as we're going to sing a few more songs, let's just soak in and enjoy the realness of God. People who have been Christians all their lives, hopefully it will encourage your faith. Let's enjoy the realness of God again and understand that He's so real, He's so powerful. Let's appreciate Him, let's worship Him that, and let's remember the beauty of the gospel as we worship Him, that we can actually know a God that's so above our ways. He's made a way through Jesus in such a beautiful way that we can actually know Him and have a relationship with Him. And so be mindful of that this morning. All right, thanks very much. I'm just going to pray. Father God, thank you so much, Lord, that you've revealed yourself to us in creation, Lord, that you've given us logic and reason and physics and science, Lord. You've set it all in motion, Lord, and you had it in such a perfect way, Lord, to create what we have around us, the universe, and to create life. You're so powerful. You're so omnipotent, Lord. You're so above our ways. You're timeless, Lord, and you're mighty and you're awesome, Lord. And we just give you praise for that now, Lord. We're so grateful that we can know you, Lord. We're grateful that you've made a way for us to have a relationship with you. And I pray that this truth would just rest in our hearts and in our minds. I pray that those who have yet to make that step of faith, that reasonable step of faith into a knowledge of God, that this would land in their hearts, Lord, and that they'd see your truth once and for all, and that they'd come to a faith in Jesus Christ, knowing that they can know God through him. And I pray now that as we worship you, Lord, you'd be blessed by our praise, Lord, and we give you praise and glory now, and thanks for all that you've done. You're so good. In Jesus' name, amen.